In this example, we'll be taking a look at how to create the vectors to build the Gothic Quatrefoil you can see on the screen. We'll be showing a range of vector creation tools as well as how to offset, merge, subtract, trim and edit curves to create the complex shapes. We will also show how to use layers to better manage working with all this data. So this is where we need to get to, but we're going to start by creating a fresh part. So under File, New, I'm going to select a single-sided job. In this case, the width is going to be 30 inches, our height 12, our thickness just 1 inch. Our Z0 position will be from the top of the material surface, and our XY datum position will be the center of the part. So now that we have our rectangular workpiece, we now need to consider adding some vectors. Before creating anything, let's take a look at the layer structure that we currently have. A single layer has been created by virtue of opening a new part, and this is currently called layer 1. And we're going to start by building the outline shape, so that's what I'll rename this to. So I'm going to come up to here and hit rename and just call this outline shape. Okay, and just click off the screen, and you can see there that that is the current active layer. So the first thing we're going to do now is to create the outline rectangular vector. So we're going to come across to the draw rectangle, and in this particular case we're going to specify it at the center of the screen. So the center will be over the 0, 0 in the center, and it will be square edge corners, and the width is going to be 27 inches and our height is going to be 10.5. So with that I can create that on the screen. We can see that there. And now I need to consider really creating sort of the two top and bottom grooves. Okay, so for that I'm just going to close out of the form now and come back up to the layers and add a new layer. Okay, in this case it's going to be called top and bottom grooves. Okay, and we'll make sure that is the active layer. Okay, and you can see that there, that it's automatically selected that. And I'm going to come across now and create the vector for the top and bottom grooves. So we're going to use the draw rectangle command again, but rather than specifying this in the form, so we're going to grab the left hand corner here and hold the left mouse key down, and you can see that I'm starting to drag this now. So I'm going to drag this, and we need to specify the X distance, which we can see there. And now whilst my left mouse key is still holding down, I can type in at the bottom of the screen 0.5 and then specify that as the Y value, and that would have created my vector specified with the X distance according to my cursor and the Y distance according to the typed input, which was 0.5. Okay, so I'm just going to close that down now, and whilst that's selected I need to move this upwards by 3/8 of an inch. So with that I'm going to come across to the transform objects menu and select the move selected objects. We're going to pick the relative option and move that up in Y by 3/8, which I can do by entering the fraction 3 divided by 8 equals, and that gives me the 0.375 decimal, and apply that and we can see that vector has been moved upwards. Well, as it states the layer is being top and bottom grooves, I have my bottom groove, so I now need to create my top groove, which I'm going to do not by recreating the rectangle but by mirroring this to the top. So whilst that's selected, I'll come into the mirror selected objects, select the option here, and in key is I've got flip around job center switched on, create a mirrored copy switched on, and I'm going to flip vertical, and we can see the second vector has now been created. If we come back up to the menus, we can see that we have the two layers. I can switch off the top and bottom grooves, and we can switch off the outline shape. So we're trying to construct this part logically with the correct levels, correct layers, and the correct items on those layers. So with that, I'm now going to create a new layer, which is going to be called foils. So with that, I've entered the name of the layer. I'm just going to switch off the two other layers, and foils is currently being shown as the active layer, and I'm going to click back onto the screen and get ready to start creating some shapes for the foil. Okay, so we're going to move forward and start creating some of these foil shapes. So we're going to move across to the create vectors menu and select the draw circle command, and in this case it's going to be a center point of 0, 0, i.e. the center of the workpiece, and the diameter is going to be 1.5 inches. So when I create that, you can see it's created the diameter 1.5 in the center. And actually in this particular case I need to move this down. So with this I'm going to select the vector now and come across to the move selected objects command and just move this by a relative position, and it's going to be y, and it's going to be negative 2/3 equals, okay, and apply that downwards, and that will have moved that down by 2/3 of an inch. So with that I'm going to close out that form now, and I now need to think about creating the other two circles that will overlap to form the start of the quatrefoil shape. So with that now I'm going to go down to the circular copy, and in this case I'm just going to change where the center is. So I'm going to double click in the rotation center, which will draw it on the screen in the center, and I'm going to put in just 3 copies altogether, and our rotation angle will be through 360, and copy those. So there we can see that we have our 3 items together. I'm going to close out that form, and the next stage really is to weld all this together, because currently all 3 are overlapping and all we really need is the external shape. So whilst they're selected, I'm going to come across now to the weld command, okay, and just select that option, and as you can see there, it's got rid of the material inside and we've just got the nice perimeter shape. Okay, so the next stage that we need to do is to really look at building the internal shape. So I'm going to go ahead now and just offset this inwards, okay. So with that I'm going to come down to the offset command, okay, whilst it's selected. We're going to go inwards and we're going to go a distance of just 0.25, okay. But what I'm going to do is specify the sharp corners being left on, okay, and I'll select those as new options. So with that, actually what I'll do is I'll just zoom in and we'll create this with it off first, and you'll see when I offset you're going to get a rounded region there, okay, which is not what we want. So if I'm going to just control Z out of that, we've selected the vector again, we're going to create the sharp corners this time and offset, and we get the defined shape we are looking for. Okay, so I'm just going to close out now and come back to our main view. And now we're going to move across and create the center of our trifoil. So in this case it's going to be center is going to be 0, 0, and our radius is going to be 1.25. So we're going to create that. You can see that in the center of the screen. We're going to move in now and we are going to weld the central circle with the inside of our trifoil. So we have those 2 picked and we're going to weld those together to get the shape we see on the screen. Okay, so the next stage is to start building some of the larger circles. So with that I'm going to come over to the create circle command, and first of all I'm just going to grow this from the circle and just grow this outwards. And of course I can stop at any particular point, or I can use the keyboard here. So I'm going to type in 7.5D, and that would have created a circle of 7.5 diameter with its center point at the first click of the circle. So with that now I'm going to close out the form and we're going to look to copy this to the left hand side. So the first thing I'm going to do is come up to my file operations and copy this to the clipboard, then come down to the transform objects and move, and this is going to be relative to its current position, and it's going to be -9 in X, and apply, and close out the form and then paste the original. Moving on from here, I'm now going to create a line across the top, so from the very top position on the left circle to the same position on the right circle. And now we're going to look to move our trifoil first of all into the midpoint between the 2 edge points on the circle, and then flush with the top line. So a better way of doing this, since we have 2 separate vectors, is to group them into one piece. So with that I'm just going to select both those entities, right mouse key over one of them and group objects. So clearly you can see that when I go to select one, it is in essence selecting both. Okay, so with that now I'm just going to select again to put it into transform mode, and I'm just going to zoom in here and we're going to look to move this across. So I'm going to pick this up now, and you can see I'm moving it by its centerpiece, and I'm just going to wake up the point we've got there, then come and wake up the other point the other side, come across, and we'll find the midpoint, which I have there, and I now need to move this up to the top. So with this I'm just simply going to pick a point on the edge there. Okay, so we've got a point just there, and I'm just going to come up now and move that and put that and place that onto that line. Okay, So we've moved that into position, so halfway across between the two, and now flush with the top. So the next stage is to start making some modifications to our circles to fill in basically the pieces at the edge of our sort of central trifoil here. So with that now, I'm actually going to group these back down onto their original layers. So now they are simply two separate entities, and we're going to look to offset these three circles. So we're going to take this item, and this item, and now offset those together. They're going to go all outwards by 0.375 and offset those. Okay, once we have this shape, I can close the form down, and I just need to add in an extra line before we can start trimming this up to create the shape. So I'm going to create a line across here and just close out from that form and come up to the trimming tool. So I'm going to select the from the edit objects, the interactive trim, and just start cutting pieces away that we don't need. Okay, and just come across to the top here and take these pieces out. You can see that we're starting to create these sort of two triangular pieces and this slightly strange shape in the center. So I'm just going to now come across and delete out the top and the sides there. So now we've got our three pieces that we were looking for. So I'm just going to close out from that form there and just delete out this center point here, this sort of bottom piece, because we're going to mirror these three pieces to the lower half. Okay, so with that now I'm just going to go into the node editing mode so you can see individual points on that vector, and I'm going to right mouse key over the span that I don't need, and I'm going to delete that span. So that span's now open-ended. Okay, so with that I'm now going to select these three vectors and place them onto a new level called V-carve shapes. So the first thing we need to do is to select the three vectors and then right mouse key over one of them and say move to layer, new layer, and in this case it's going to be called V-carve shapes. Okay, and we are going to have this as visible, but the layer is not active. That's fine. So we've got those entities shown on the screen along with the foils. So what I now need to do is to box pick both the two sort of trifoil shapes and the three corners and mirror them to the bottom half of the screen. So I'm simply going to select those entities on the screen. Now I've selected from left to right, so it's only going to pick up the whole entities within my vector shape, and I'm going to come now down to the mirror selected objects, and the key here is to flip around job center is switched on, create a mirrored copy is switched on, and then flip vertical. Okay, so with that I can close out now and we can see those shapes that have been created. If we just check to see what has happened to the layers, because obviously we had a number of entities on different layers there, so I'm going to switch off the foils and we can just see the V-carve shapes, and then I can switch off the V-carve shapes and just show the foils. So everything seems to be working out well at the moment, and we'll now move to the next stage. Okay, so the next stage is to start duplicating some of these components, and we're going to start with these two vectors that we've got selected on the screen, and these are going to be mirrored across to the left hand side of that left hand circle. Before I do that, I'm actually going to create a mirror line which I'm going to take from the top of the circle down to the bottom. Okay, so we've got a line running straight down, and I'm going to pick these two vectors, which are the items I want to mirror, and the final item is the item I want to mirror around. So that will be the third item picked. Across to the mirror selected objects, I want to flip around job center, switch that off, okay, and I'm going to create a mirrored copy and flip around the line. Okay, so that's mirrored that across to the left hand side, which I'm happy with, and now I'm just going to switch off that vector there, which I don't need, and we now need to mirror all the items including the circle but not the center one across to the right hand side. But one thing I need to do first is these two vectors in the center are currently separate vectors, not joined as one, so I'm going to pick both items and try and join them together by coming across now to the join open vectors. Okay, I've specified a low tolerance, and you can clearly see at the bottom of here it says vectors after joining will be 1, so when I hit join that will join it into 1, and clearly now when I pick it, it's a single entity. So with that, we're just going to go full screen now, and we're going to look to mirror all the items within my box here. So I've box picked from left to right, and I'm going to let go, and you can see those items that we're going to take, and we're going to mirror them across to the right hand side of the screen. So back up to mirror selected objects, we're going to flip around the job center, create a mirrored copy. In this case we're going to flip horizontal. Okay, so we've pieced that across to the right hand side, and we're getting closer to our finished quatrefoil. But the next stage now is to think about creating the center of the central circle that will then copy out to the other circles. Okay, so with our foils level selected, we're now going to start building the center of our central circle, which will form a quatrefoil. So with that now, I'm going to select that vector and start creating some offsets. So I'm going to move across to the offset option, and we're going to go inwards. In this case, we're going to go 0.25 inches inwards and offset that, and then following that, with that one selected, we're going to come in by a further 3/8 of an inch. So 3 divided by 8 equals, and offset. And we can now look to then create a circle to build the sort of central quatrefoil. So I'm going to close out that form now, go into the circle command, and just simply click with my left mouse key and then grow that up, and hopefully we can get to 3, which we have. I can let go with my mouse key, so that will have created a circle, center point where my first click is, and the diameter where I release the key. So with that, I'm going to close the form down now and pick it to put it into transform mode. Okay, and I'm just going to pick the top point there and just literally move that up till it meets that inner offset circle. I now need to create 3 other copies here, so I'm going to go across to my circle copy layout. I actually want 4 copies in total. The center will be the center of rotation, so just double click to make that the center, and we're going to go through a full 360 and copy. So we've created those 4 circles now, and like we did with the trifoil, we need to weld these together to form the shape that we need. So coming across to the Edit Objects menu, I'm going to select the Weld command, which will create that shape, but of course I don't need that very central piece in the middle. So with that now, I'm going to come back out and select the internal quatrefoil, and we're going to offset that inwards by 0.25. So that's offset inwards. Okay, so we're now going to move across and create the central circle, which will be centered in the middle of the part, and I'm going to grow that up, and in this case it's going to be 3.75 in diameter, which I'm just going to use through the keyboard shortcuts. So I'm going to hit 3.75 and then hit D, and that will have created it exactly where I need. I'm going to close down the form and pick the inner quatrefoil vector. So we've got 2 vectors selected, and just weld them together to create this sort of chamfered edge on the quatrefoil. Okay, so moving here now, we're going to think about the edge points or the edge areas around the quatrefoil. So I'm going to take the outer one and just offset that now outwards, okay, by 0.375, okay, and offset that out and close that down. And I'm just going to select this vector plus the sort of outer circle there, and just right mouse key and move those to layer V carve shapes. Okay, so with that now, I'm just going to come back up to the form and switch off quatrefoils, switch on the V carve shapes which is shown, and make that active, and then just look to try and create the shape that we need to form this. I'm doing this rather than by trimming it out using the limit tool. We're actually going to subtract one vector from another. So with that, I'm actually going to select the internal circular vector and shift and pick the quatrefoil vector as the second vector, and come across to our Edit Objects menu, and next to the Weld command is the Subtract command, where we're going to subtract the second selected vector from the first vector. So as I click on that now, you can see we're left with the 4 defined corner shapes that we were looking for, and if I actually come back now and switch on the rest of the foils, you can start to see that we've quite quickly created the centerpiece in the central circle. Okay, so the next stage now is to make a copy to place it in the left and right circles. So I'm simply going to drag from the lower right hand corner and box pick all the way across, which should pick all the entities that I need. Okay, so we have all those saved, and I'm now going to click on them to put them into transform mode, and I'm going to hold the control key down on the keyboard and just pick that item up and just literally go down and place it on the center of the left circle. Okay, so with that now I could do the same and move it across to the right hand side, or I could come across to the mirror selected objects, in this case flip around job center, and I would just create a mirrored copy and flip horizontal to create it into the right circle. Okay, so with that now I'm just going to come up and let's piece it all together by switching on both the top and bottom grooves plus the outline shape. And as you can see, we've got quite a complex shape that's been created using some quite neat tools, where we've been using offsetting and trimming and subtracting to create this very unique shape. Okay, so following on from this, there is another tutorial which looks at the toolpathing, both 2D and 2.5D, which is one of the related videos. So with this now, I'm going to come up to the menu and just do a file save as, and we're going to save this as the Gothic Quatrefoil vector drawing CRV file and save this ready for toolpathing at a later point.